Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our news program. I'm Alaina Pinto. The island country of Malta, which is located in the Mediterranean Sea south of Sicily and Italy, was the first country in Europe to legalize adult use of cannabis in 2021. That law allowed possession of 7 grams in public and 50 at home, as well as the freedom to grow up to 4 plants. Since then, public concern over the pungent odor of the plant medicine has increased complaints, and these changes have been made to curb that negative reaction by the public. Now, if you smoke at home and your neighbor complains, you would be subject to a stiff fine equivalent to 275 US dollars. We start our international reports from Europe. Here's Ben Stevens.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's report from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Now, this week, 2 of Europe's leading cannabis reformers have made some major progress towards adult use legalization. First up, in Switzerland, following 2 years of running government-backed cannabis pilot projects in cities like Zurich, Bern and Basel, the positive results of these pilots have encouraged lawmakers to continue pushing ahead with permanent reform. At the beginning of this year, the National Council Committee approved a preliminary draft bill that would allow cultivation, consumption, possession and sale of cannabis legally. This week, the National Council's Social Security and Health Committee has given the green light to the Federal Act on Cannabis Products, laying the foundations for the possible legalisation of cannabis across Switzerland. This latest development, according to local advocate organisation IG Hemp, is a historic moment for Swiss cannabis policy and shows that there is the political will to effectively combat the black market and strengthen consumer safety. With this latest vote of support, the draft bill will begin a 3-month consultation phase in the coming weeks. Once that's finished, a newly revised draft will be prepared and head to the Federal Council and National Council for a final vote, though it has also been suggested that this could go to a referendum, putting the Swiss public in control of its passage. Meanwhile, over in the similarly cannabis liberal Czech Republic, efforts to decriminalise cannabis have officially been signed into law, seeing advocates breathe a long-fought sigh of relief. While this battle has been won, the war is still far from over, with efforts to establish Europe's first commercial cannabis market still underway, but seemingly on ice. From January 1st, adults aged 21 and over will be allowed to grow up to 3 plants, carry 25 grams and keep up to 100 grams in their home, but legal retail, cannabis clubs and cannabis stores are for now off the table. That's all for this week's European Cannabis Report. I am Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. An illegal immigrant has been sentenced to 8 months in prison after pleading guilty to cultivating some 400 cannabis plants in a house near Newcastle in the north of England. The judge described how Vu Nguyen, 33, who came to the UK from Vietnam 5 years ago on the back of a lorry, was living in miserable conditions, sleeping on a mattress in the kitchen when he was arrested back in March. The court also heard how Mr. Nguyen had been growing cannabis in exchange for food, which would arrive by delivery driver to the property every 2 months. According to the prosecutor, the cannabis plants are worth between £21,000 and £96,000. After serving his sentence, it's expected that Mr. Nguyen will be deported. The news comes as the British government's ongoing campaign to curb illegal migration continues to gather pace and garner media attention. Could it be that a failure to provide adequate provisions, less than £50 per week for asylum seekers, is pushing those in desperate need into illegal activity? By contrast, the UK continues to be the largest cultivator of medical cannabis globally, accounting for 43% of the total international market in 2021, with the vast majority exported. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is the finding by Pure Sun Farms, which did a research study on how the THC percentages have been differentiating between batches. And they found that throughout the process that what they have been doing is instead of actually cropping each plant and producing a batch of that, they are cropping layered by layered when it comes to the plants, which means that the THC percentages has been fluctuating in between the 7 to 8% range when it comes between each batch being launched or being then distributed among the OCS. This is something that now hopefully more LPs will be looking into, especially when it comes to their batch loads and when it comes to their percentaging, because we don't want to be putting any false information on our packaging, because that would obviously make it pretty much deceitful. The CBSA officers has seized $1.2 million in cannabis at the Calgary airport. This is obviously something that is very, I don't want to say startling, but is startling due to the fact that we do have the legal industry, but the black market seems to still be running wild, especially when it comes to that much money being seized by the CBSA. This is something that we are going to be obviously looking more into and hopefully getting a little bit more information and putting a little bit more strategic planning when it comes to these traffickers. When it comes to Canada, this is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Cheers. Peace.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has developed a vibrant adult use market since opening day for sales in November of 2018. And now a milestone was reached, and that was announced by the Cannabis Control Commission this week. Here's Curtis Emery with the detail.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Good news out of Mass, the adult use market has officially surpassed $8 billion in revenue since the market opened. 2025 is on pace to beat out 2024, a stellar year in cannabis, with top sales items including flower, followed closely behind by vaporizers. Top sales days in Mass include April 17th and 18th, the lead up to 420, and July 2nd. Also out of Mass, a joint committee met last week to consider two bills, one on billboard advertising in the state and another on sales, discounts, and loyalty programs on the dispensary level. Advocates of the billboard bill are hoping that billboards will be a way for small, local, and equity-owned companies to advertise in-state without dealing with the state's strict regulations on audience ratios and dealing with MSOs who are currently gaming the system while also affording to pay the fines levied by the state. People against the bill are concerned that exposing children to cannabis billboards might develop unnecessary habits before legal age. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And we have a bonus story out of Massachusetts. Executive producer Jimmy Young was on hand at a cannabis-friendly golf tournament in Sterling, Massachusetts. Now, there's no need to twist Jimmy's arm to attend such a worthy fundraising event, and we look forward to seeing what he has to say.
Ah, the sounds of golf and the smell of cannabis. Well, that's been part of this culture for years. This past week at the Heritage Country Club in Sterling, Massachusetts, Angela Bradbury's Canna Management Group organized this event.
You know, the whole goal of the event was to create an intimate setting for our operators. And we feel like we did exactly that. So created that space, that energy, and of course, blending those both worlds, right, of that golf industry with the cannabis industry. So it was extremely fun for us.
On an absolutely perfect day for summer golf in New England, a dozen vendors and foursomes raised money and awareness for the Gosder Cherilus Foundation and the Worcester Food Bank. But I was intrigued with the putting green competition. Okay, what's Canna Management doing here?
All right, Canna Management is setting up a little putting game today at High on the Green. If you hit one of our pre-rolls or one of our Squires, then you're a winner and you get to keep it. Squires Pink Pineapple Elixir, my personal favorite.
Adam Denault went home with the big prize.
Hey! Hey, you hit the money!
That's quite a stash.
I know.
How many pre-rolls are in there?
Jeez, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pre-rolls.
I've never seen a putting for pre-rolls event that you guys had on the putting green, and I want to know who came up with that idea.
Well, just going to golf events, right? There's always a putt in play. Typically, it's focused on alcohol. And so we just really wanted to switch that out, highlight our vendors, our supporters of the event.
I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News in Sterling, Massachusetts.
One of the best challenges for law enforcement in this new era of adult use of cannabis is the ability to test drivers under its influence, proving that people, and especially medical patients who operate vehicles under the influence, might not be impaired. Many state legislatures are trying to figure out how to detect if a driver is operating under the influence, but because every person has a different tolerance, proving impairment is still not an exact science. But now, a professor of law at the Rutgers-Camden School of Law has published a paper outlining why the tests being administered by police are pseudoscientific police science. Professor McNichols's paper outlines the challenges of conducting roadside tests for impairment. He calls on the substance use scientific community to come up with a test that reflects the fact that being under the influence of cannabis is different than testing for alcohol. McNichol argues that, quote, existing tools for making this on-the-spot medico-legal determination are inadequate, owing in large part to their lack of scientific rigor, unquote. Our own Amie Carter continues to lobby for changes in the detection laws and practices in her state of Michigan. Here's her report for this week.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm reporting this week at the second annual Boonie Bash in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There are bands, vendors, music throughout the weekend, and a ton of different things to do, from axe throwing to glass blowing to a video arcade. This is a great event that you should definitely attend next year. Get ready, Muskegon. Cannabis businesses with drive-thrus can now stay open until 2 a.m. Used to be midnight. 3 dispensaries, including the family-owned Grassy Knoll, Bodega, and Greencraft, are leading the night shift, with Grassy Knoll racking up to 7,000 to 9,000 transactions monthly, mostly between 9 p.m. and midnight. The Grassy Knoll is a family-owned shop that opened in November 2021. Meanwhile, Lansing's Hey Captain is shaking up the edible market. Forget about the usual gummies. This innovative brand offers melt-in-your-mouth candies with the motto, no gummies, no brownies, no bullshit. Founded by cannabis pioneer Captain Kirk, their unique treats have already snagged 11 High Times Cannabis Cups. Hey Captain edibles are products sold at multiple locations across Michigan, so definitely check them out. That's it for this week. I'm Amie Carter from Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Over the past few weeks, Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, has been reporting on the challenges of impaired driving in his state of Illinois. Officers can still pull drivers over if the smell of cannabis is present, but there are 2 sets laws regarding the smell of raw flower or burnt flower and depend on the officer to distinguish between the 2. Here's the Chicago clone guy's report for this week.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting out of Chicago, Illinois area for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in. Happy to report that the second annual Illinois Craft Showcase is going on next month in Tilton, Illinois at Molly's Joint. What this event is actually 50 plus craft brands, which is a craft cannabis grower. The difference between that and the commercial is pretty much the big guy and the craft is kind of the little guy. So there's going to be 50 plus craft brands for the second annual craft brand showcase going on at Molly's Joint in August on the 16th. Looking forward to that. I'm actually going to be in attendance there talking to a lot of people about clones. Imagine that, especially the local craft people. So come visit me there. Oh, great news is that you can get free tickets through the Illinois News Joint. Illinois News Joint. You can go on there, look for it, and you can get free tickets to the show if you want to go. There's also free samples from all these craft brands, more vendors and more. So yeah, literally free, legal cannabis samples to try out at the show. And you can get free tickets. Check it out. Pretty cool. What else is going on? Oh, big news here I think is pretty cool in Illinois. These sales numbers I got for May were almost $150 million of sales for the whole state. In May. The reason why this is kind of important is that we're on track to really beat the crap out of last year numbers-wise. Last year, we didn't hit the 150 million mark until the late winter. I think it was about October or November. So we hit that number well before that mark this year. So last year we hit 2 billion in sales. Maybe we'll do 3 billion. Time will tell. But I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
My name is Xavier Jailete. I'm the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and a cannabis attorney at McDonald Hopkins. And here's what's happening in Colorado cannabis news this week. This week's story revolves around a controversial person here in the Colorado cannabis community, Wanda James, one of the first Black cannabis business owners in the United States, and an ongoing support of social equity and Black-owned businesses in cannabis. Ms. James was elected to the Board of Regents of the University of Colorado, where she oversaw various things, including budget spending and public relations. Now, the University of Colorado recently issued a campaign called the T on THC, which was a campaign focused on educating families and youth around the risk of consuming high THC cannabis products. Controversially, the campaign, the imagery used in the campaign, largely featured Black and brown babies and families, seemingly indicated that these were the communities that most needed the attention of the campaign and the education it provided. Ms. James flagged that as being racially insensitive, and the University of Colorado ultimately agreed with her, pulling many of the controversial images and issuing a formal apology. Now, this week's story focuses on Ms. James's continued push to have that program actually defunded that ultimately resulted in this campaign. Surprisingly, she has the support of the Colorado governor, Jared Polis, but unfortunately she does not have the support of her fellow Board of Regent members, who voted 7-1 against Ms. James to censure her, claiming that her campaign to defund this program reflected a breach of her duty of loyalty and a potential conflict of interest between her personal interests and that as her role as a regent. Now, this is an ongoing saga that underscores the importance of Black business owners in the cannabis community and the need for the community as a whole to attempt to rectify past injustices for cannabis consumption, distribution, and use, primarily by the Black and brown communities across the United States. So stay tuned for more information on this story as it progresses. And I'm Xavier Jailete reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block, or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.